Hello. In this video, I want to go over some of the linguistic puzzles that motivate Frege's philosophy of language or theory of meaning. Before we look at the puzzles that motivate his theory, it is important to first go back and look at some of the main features or tenets of the simple theory. Remember that according to the simple theory, the meaning of linguistic expressions are objects or things out in the world. So, for example, the meaning of a proper name like Hector is just the individual Hector. The meaning of a predicate phrase like is a philosopher is just the property of being a philosopher. And the meaning of a declarative sentence like Hector is a philosopher is the Russellian proposition whose constituent is Hector himself and the property of being a philosopher. So that's what we have here. In addition to that, one term that we introduced in the first video was the notion of an extension. And an extension is just the referent of a linguistic expression. So the extension of the sentence Hector is a philosopher is just the set of Hector and the set of all individuals who are philosophers. The first puzzle I want to consider is what's usually known as the identity statements puzzle. So consider the following two sentences. The morning star is the evening star, and the morning star is the morning star. Let's assume that the simple theory is correct, that the meaning of linguistic expressions are just the objects or properties that they stand for. Then, according to that, right, the name the morning star and the name the evening star would turn out to mean exactly the same thing because both of these phrases are meant to designate or refer to the same object, namely Venus. In other words, the term the morning star and the term the evening star have as their extension one and the same object, again, namely Venus. So the propositions that sentence 1 and the proposition that sentence 2 express are the Russellian proposition whose constituents are just Venus and Venus again and the identity relation. Thus, if the simple theory is correct, then what is entailed is that sentence number 1 and sentence number 2 mean exactly the same thing. They mean exactly the same thing. But of course, that just seems false because it seems that sentence 1 and sentence 2 do in fact differ in many ways. So if we look back at sentence number 2 just seems to be known a priori. In other words, it seems to be known intuitively true. It's also uninformative. Like, we know that the morning star, whatever that is, just is the morning star. And it also seems to be analytically true, meaning if there is such a thing as the morning star, then that's going to be true no matter what, right? Because everything is identical to itself and to nothing else. So sentence number 2, the morning star is the morning star, is known a priori or intuitively true. It's not an informative sentence. And if it's true, it seems to be analytically true or always true, just in virtue of the meaning of the words. On the other hand, sentence number 1, the morning star is the evening star, that doesn't seem to be known a priori or intuitively true. That seems to be known in virtue of some kind of empirical verification. That's what we call a posteriori knowledge. It is also very informative. If we come to find out that the morning star, or the object that we call the morning star, is in fact the object that we call the evening star, we find out that those two things are exactly the same, then that is a very informative thing to know. In addition to that, this sentence number 1 seems to be synthetically true. In other words, what makes it true is not just true in virtue of its meaning, but something else, some way in which it corresponds to the world. So this seems to suggest that the simple theory must be false. And we are able to represent what we just said here in a standard argument 4. So premise 1, let's assume that a name A and a name B refer to exactly the same thing. Well, if premise 1 is true, and if the simple theory is also true, then what that seems to suggest is that A and B, these names, have exactly the same meaning. Premise 3, if A and B have exactly the same meaning, then A and B cannot differ in their cognitive significance, meaning there's nothing different cognitively speaking about these sentences. But of course, or sorry, not sentences, but names. But of course, if something is named A and B, there is going to be a difference in their cognitive significance. We saw this with the example of the sentence, the morning star is the morning star and the morning star is the evening star. These sentences seem to differ in some way cognitively speaking, even though the terms the evening star and the morning star refer to the exact same thing. Therefore, it must be that the simple theory is false. Another linguistic puzzle that motivates Frege's philosophy of language is what is sometimes known as the propositional attitudes report puzzle. So consider the following two sentences. Both of these sentences ascribe a particular attitude towards John. So sentence number one states that John believes that Mark Twain wrote Huckleberry Finn. Sentence two, John believes that Samuel Clemens wrote Huckleberry Finn. So if you know anything about Mark Twain was just the pen name for Samuel Clemens. In other words, Samuel Clemens and Mark Twain are the exact same person. So if the simple theory is correct, right, given the principle of compositionality that the meaning of sentences is determined by the meaning of individual words, if we change one term in a sentence that is co-referential with another one, in other words, take the name Mark Twain and Sam Clemens, right? Both of these terms are co-referential because they refer to the exact same thing. So in addition to that, if the simple theory is correct and all there is to the meaning of words is the things that they refer to, so in this case, just Mark Twain or Sam Clemens, the individual, then what would follow from that, if we replace Mark Twain with Sam Clemens, and if it's true that John believes that Mark Twain wrote Huck Finn, and then we replace Mark Twain with Sam Clemens, then presumably we would not be affecting the truth value of the sentence, right? So in other words, sentence one and sentence two, in virtue of their meaning, they both mean the same thing or would mean the same thing under the simple theory, would also turn out to have the same truth value. But this just seems false because it seems possible that John actually, it's true that John believes that Mark Twain wrote Huckleberry Finn, but not true that John believes that Samuel Clemens wrote Huckleberry Finn because he doesn't know who Samuel Clemens is, right? So we can kind of represent what we just said in this following argument to show that this would be invalid, right? So premise one, let's assume that it's true that John believes that Mark Twain wrote Huckleberry Finn, okay? According to the principle of identity, Mark Twain is just another name for Sam Clemens because they both refer to the same person, so this would be true. Would it follow from these two premises that John also believes that Samuel Clemens wrote Huckleberry Finn? Well, of course not, right? Because again, it's possible that John has heard or knows who Mark Twain is. He even read Huckleberry Finn, but he has no idea who Samuel Clemens is. So he could come to not believe that Samuel Clemens wrote Huckleberry Finn. So how can this be that the sentence John believes that Mark Twain wrote Huckleberry Finn is true, but the sentence John believes that Samuel Clemens wrote Huckleberry Finn is false if both Mark Twain and Samuel Clemens refer to the exact same thing? Well, there's something seems to have gone wrong here, and what Frege thinks this suggests is that the simple theory of semantics must be false because it's not capturing something about the meanings of these individual words. So we can capture or represent this general version of the propositional attitudes report puzzle in the following argument against the simple theory. Let's assume that we have two names, A and B, and both of these names refer to the same object. From premise one, it would follow that the following sentence is true then. A is identical to B. Now let's assume that an individual S believes that this person A has a particular property F. Let's assume that that is true. Well, if the simple theory is true and premise 2 is also true, right, that A is identical to B, then it follows that this particular person S also believes that B, this person, has property F, making this sentence, S believes B has property F, true. However, it seems possible that the sentence S believes B has property F is false, while at the same time sentence S believes that A has property F is true, even though both A and B refer to the same person, because we do know that they refer to the same person, right? This follows from the assumption that we made in premise 1 and the inference that is made in premise 2. Therefore, something has gone wrong here. There's something that the simple theory is not capturing, so it must be the case that the simple theory is false. So again, the puzzles are the following, right? If we assume that something like the simple theory is true, remember, the simple theory maintains that the meaning of linguistic expressions are just the objects or properties that we refer to or express. If we assume that, then it would follow from that sentences like the following, 1 and 2, would have to mean the same thing, that they have the same meaning. But if we step back, I mean, you don't even have to step back. Intuitively, that just seems blatantly false, right? From the get-go. Like, no, sentence 1 seems to mean something different than sentence 2, even though, yes, we know that the terms, the morning star and the evening star, refer to the same thing, but they still seem to differ in meaning. So the question that Frege wants to answer is, what is that difference in meaning then? Because meaning doesn't seem to just be the things that these terms refer to. So if they're not the things that these terms refer to, then what is the difference in meaning? What are these meanings, right, that account for this? Similarly, right, if we take, again, assume that the simple theory is true and assume that the principle of compositionality is true, which again, we have every reason to believe that it's true, then it would follow from that sentence number 1 and sentence number 2 not only mean the same thing, but that if sentence number 1 were in fact true, then sentence number 2 would also have to be true, right? But that seems false. It seems possible that John, or like many of us, could believe that Mark Twain wrote Huckleberry Finn, but fail to know that Mark Twain and Samuel Clemens are the same person, and therefore that Samuel Clemens also wrote Huckleberry Finn, right? It seems possible that one of these sentences could be true while the other one false. However, the simple theory is not able to account, at least at first glance, is not able to account for how this difference in truth value occurs, because the thing that the simple theory is suggesting is that the meaning of individual sentences are propositions. Remember, propositions have their truth value inherently. So if it's true that John believes that Mark Twain wrote Huckleberry Finn, again, this sentence is going to be true in virtue of the proposition it expresses, and both of these express the same proposition, then both of these would have to be true. But again, intuitively, we think that one could be true, not the other. So the question that Frege wants to address in his philosophy of language is, what accounts for the meaning and difference in the sentences, not just what accounts for the meaning, the difference in meaning of these sentences, but also the differences in truth values. Why is it that one could be true and the other one false? Because the simple theory doesn't seem to be able to account for that. So that concludes this video.